Ma'am, I don't care what your phone says. This line is for people who actually belong in it. Trevor Banks said it loud enough for the whole priority lane to hear, and he said it with a smile, because men like Trevor have learned that cruelty lands harder when it's delivered politely. He didn't know the woman standing in front of him owned the runway he was standing on. He didn't know that in the next 4 hours, he would watch his own airport go dark. He just saw a faded olive field jacket, a canvas satchel with a broken zipper pull, and scuffed leather boots that had clearly walked through more mud than marble. And he decided, in the half-second it takes a small man to feel large, that she didn't belong. Rewind 6 hours. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport at 5 in the morning smells like burnt coffee and jet fuel, and it sounds like 1,000 rolling suitcases dragging across polished tile. Danielle Whitfield stood at gate B14 with her boarding pass already open on her phone, her reading glasses pushed up into close-cropped hair, and a thin gold ring hanging from a chain tucked under her collar. She touched it without thinking, the way some people touch a cross or a set of keys. It had been her mother's. Loretta Whitfield had spent 19 years pushing a cleaning cart through the employee corridors of this exact terminal, and she had never once, in 19 years, been handed a first-class boarding pass. Her daughter had one now. Danielle Whitfield had built Whitfield Ground Holdings from a single fuel truck contract into the company that quietly ran the tarmac operations for 11 airlines across 4 hub airports, and she had done it dressed exactly the way she was dressed that morning, because comfort had never once cost her a deal. But she had learned, over 20 years of board meetings and back-channel negotiations, that some rooms needed her invisible before they would let her be powerful. So she waited in line like anyone else, said nothing about who she was, and let Trevor Banks make his own decision. Keep that ring in mind. It will matter again before this story is over. Danielle had slept 4 hours in the last 2 days, finishing the paperwork on a merger that would put her name on ground operations for 40% of transatlantic cargo out of the Southeast. She was tired in the specific way that makes people either short-tempered or unshakably calm, and Danielle had always tipped toward calm. Her father used to say she had the kind of patience that scared people, because patience like that usually means the person has already decided how the story ends. She stepped up to the scanner, held out her phone, and Trevor Banks put up a hand like he was stopping traffic. This lane's for first class and Sapphire members. Coach boarding hasn't been called. I'm in the right line, Danielle said, still smiling, still patient. Seat 1A. Trevor let out a short laugh with no warmth in it at all. He looked her up and down, lingering on the frayed cuff of her jacket, and something in his face decided the joke was worth repeating louder. Sweetheart, I've had 3 people try to sneak up here already this morning. Nice try. Stepped to the side. Behind her, a man in a pressed navy suit sighed theatrically and checked his watch. This was Bradford Ashcombe, managing partner of Ashcombe Capital Group, a man whose firm had a $340 million proposal sitting on Danielle's desk at that very moment, though neither of them knew it yet. Some of us have calls to make before Wheels Up, Bradford said, to no one and everyone. Trevor straightened at the sound of a voice he recognized as important, and turned back to Danielle with fresh confidence, the confidence of a man who has just been handed an audience. Danielle placed her phone on the scanner without another word. It chimed. The screen flashed green. Danielle Whitfield, Seat 1A, Sapphire Elite. For 1 full second, nobody moved. Trevor's mouth was still open around the beginning of another sentence that never came out. The gate agent behind him stopped typing. Even the boarding music seemed to pause. That was the first frozen moment of the morning, and Trevor Banks would spend the rest of his life wishing he'd paid attention to it. He didn't. He blinked, cleared his throat, and reached for the one weapon men like him always reach for when the system betrays their assumptions. I'm going to need to see photo ID. We've had a lot of stolen passes lately. It was a flat lie and a flat violation of airline protocol, since the barcode scan had already cleared her through security twice. Danielle knew the rulebook better than the CEO of the airline did, because her company had helped rewrite half of it 3 years earlier during a federal compliance audit. She said none of that. She handed over her passport, watched him turn it over twice looking for a flaw that didn't exist, and took it back when he shoved it across the counter without a word of apology. "Enjoy your flight," she said quietly, in a tone that made him look away first. Terminal 3 runs a customer service refresher every Tuesday. You might want to sign up. She walked down the jet bridge believing the worst part of her morning was over. She had no idea it hadn't even started. Danielle Whitfield had learned to read a room the way other executives read a balance sheet, and the first-class cabin of Meridian Sky Flight 447 told her everything in the first 90 seconds. It smelled like warmed nuts and leather conditioner. The air was cool and still, and the woman blocking her way to the overhead bin had a smile so tight it looked stitched on. This was Vanessa Sharp, lead flight attendant, 17 years with Meridian Sky, a woman who had built an entire identity around the idea that the front of the plane was a private club, and she was its gatekeeper. Vanessa was kind to people wearing watches she recognized. She was cruel to people wearing jackets she didn't. That single detail told you everything you needed to know about her, and it would matter a great deal in about 4 hours. "These bins are for our first-class guests, sweetie," Vanessa said, one hand flat against the closed compartment. "You'll want to check that bag or bring it back to coach. You're holding up the aisle." "I'm in 1A, Danielle said, and held up her phone a second time that morning, already tired of proving a fact that a scanner had confirmed twice. Vanessa's eyes flicked to the seat number, back to the satchel, back to the boots. Something in her face soured. "We actually have a dress code up here, as a courtesy to our premium travelers. Your attire is a little casual for the cabin." There was no such policy. There had never been such a policy. Danielle knew, because her firm had consulted on that exact section of the operations manual, and the only restriction on the books was profanity and bare feet. She said none of that either. She simply repeated that she'd like to stow her bag, and Vanessa stepped aside with a sigh sharp enough to cut glass. Bradford Ashcombe swept into the cabin 2 minutes later like a man arriving at his own coronation, and Vanessa transformed on the spot, all warmth and champagne offers. "Mr. Ashcombe, welcome back. Can I take your coat?" He settled into 1B directly across the aisle, glanced at Danielle, and made no attempt to lower his voice. "Vanessa," he said, loud enough that 3 rows heard him clearly, "are we running a charity flight today? I pay $11,000 for a ticket, so I don't have to sit next to someone who looks like she wandered in off a Greyhound bus." Vanessa actually laughed. Not a stifled laugh. A real one, the kind that tells you exactly where someone's loyalties sit. "I completely understand, sir. There was a ticketing error at the gate. Let me see what I can do." Have you ever sat perfectly still while 2 strangers decided out loud, in front of an audience, that you didn't deserve a chair you'd paid for? Danielle opened her laptop and began typing, because she had learned decades earlier that reacting only feeds people like Bradford Ashcombe. And she preferred to let people dig their own graves in full view of witnesses. 10 minutes later, pre-departure drinks came around. Vanessa served champagne to 1B, to 2A, to 2B. She walked past Danielle entirely. "Excuse me," Danielle said evenly. "Sparkling water, please. We're actually out of clean glassware up here," Vanessa said, not even slowing down. "I can get you tap water once we're at altitude." It was a small, deliberate cruelty, and it was only the beginning of the third and worst escalation of the morning, because 5 minutes after that, Vanessa came marching back down the aisle, wearing the mask of a woman with terrible news to deliver, and she stopped directly in front of seat 1A loudly enough for the entire cabin to hear. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to gather your things. We have a family that got separated in the booking system, a sapphire couple, and they need to sit together. We're moving you to 34E. We'll refund the fare difference. There was no couple, there was no error. There was only Bradford Ashcombe, smirking behind a champagne flute, and 11 passengers now watching openly, some with their phones quietly angled upward. I'm not moving, Danielle said, calm as still water. I booked this seat 3 months ago. If a couple needs to sit together, ask for a volunteer. I'm not it. Vanessa's fake smile dropped like a curtain. This isn't a request, it's a crew directive. Refuse a direct order from a flight attendant, and you're in violation of federal aviation regulations. Pick up your bag, or we will have a serious problem. The cabin had gone dead silent, the kind of silence that has weight. Danielle closed her laptop with a soft, deliberate click that somehow sounded louder than a slammed door. I suggest you choose your next sentence very carefully, Vanessa, she said, reading the name tag slowly, like she was reading a verdict. Because right now you are lying to a paying passenger, attempting to fraudulently downgrade a confirmed ticket, and threatening me with a federal statute to cover for your own bias. I am not moving to 34E. Vanessa's face went a deep, furious red, the face of someone who has never once been challenged by a person she'd already decided was beneath her. She spun toward the galley and picked up the red intercom phone connected straight to the flight deck. This was the second retention point of the morning, the moment. The story stopped being about rudeness and became about power. And what happened next would end 4 careers, cost one company $340 million, and shut down the busiest airport on the East Coast for 11 minutes. Keep reading, because none of the people standing in that aisle had any idea whose name was actually on the seat. Captain Russell Doyle stepped out of the cockpit like a man who had never once been told no and didn't plan to start that morning. 22 years in the left seat, a jaw like a closed fist, and a habit of deciding who was guilty before he'd heard a single fact. Vanessa met him halfway down the aisle, already reciting her version. She's refusing every instruction, Captain. Verbally hostile. I don't feel safe up here with her. Bradford Ashcombe nodded along, like a man testifying under oath. It's true, Captain. She's been a problem since the gate. We shouldn't have to tolerate this kind of behavior. Captain Doyle looked at Danielle, the way Trevor Banks had looked at her, the way Vanessa Sharp had looked at her, and made the exact same mistake for the exact same reason. Ma'am, I don't care about your seat number. My flight attendant runs this cabin. You have 2 choices. Walk back to 34E right now, or I call security and you leave this aircraft in handcuffs and land yourself on the federal no-fly list. Which is it going to be? The threat hung in the recycled cabin air like smoke. A forced removal meant police boots on the jet bridge, a viral video with her face in it, a missed board meeting in London, and a headline she would spend a year living down. It was the exact leverage airlines have used for decades to make people disappear quietly. Captain Doyle expected her to fold. Instead, Danielle reached under her collar, closed her hand around her mother's ring for one steadying second, and pulled out her phone. Call them, she said softly. Doyle blinked, genuinely thrown, the first crack in his certainty. He keyed his radio instead. Gate agent. This is the flight deck. We have a level 2 disruption in first class. Get Atlanta PD and airport security on board. We need a physical extraction. Copy that, Captain. Trevor Banks's voice crackled back, gleeful and eager, a man delighted to be included in someone else's downfall. Danielle bypassed the airline's spotty onboard Wi-Fi entirely, opened an encrypted line, and dialed a single number she had memorized for exactly this kind of morning. Rang once. Marcus, she said, calm enough that 3 rows of stunned passengers actually stopped breathing to listen. 600 miles north, in a glass-walled command center, overlooking the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson, Marcus Fenwick, chief operating officer of Whitfield Ground Holdings, sat up so fast his coffee nearly went sideways across his keyboard. Miss Whitfield, you're supposed to be wheels up in 6 minutes. Change of plans, Marcus. I'm sitting on Meridian Sky Flight 447 at Gate B14, and the flight crew is currently attempting to have me arrested for the crime of not looking wealthy enough for row 1. Captain Doyle actually laughed out loud. A short, ugly bark. Put the phone away, ma'am. Playing pretend on a cell phone isn't going to save you from a federal charge. Danielle didn't look at him. Marcus, pull the ground services contract for Meridian Sky at Atlanta. Pulling it now, a pause, then the sound of a man doing math very quickly in his head. Danielle, that's every tug, every fuel line, every jet bridge they lease from us at this airport. Suspending it freezes their entire southeast hub inside the hour. That's exactly what it will do, Danielle said, an edge of ice sliding into her voice for the first time all morning. Suspend it now. Tug drivers kill their engines. Fuel crews shut every valve. Nobody at this airport moves a single Meridian Sky aircraft until I say otherwise. And Marcus, after that, get me the FAA regional director on the line. I want to report a captain abusing federal detainment authority against a fully compliant, paying passenger. She lowered the phone and looked up at Russell Doyle, whose confident sneer was already starting to slip at the edges, the way ice slips before it finally cracks all the way through. You wanted to show me who has authority on this aircraft, Captain, she said quietly. Let's find out how much authority you have without fuel, without a tug, and without a gate to push back from. Captain Doyle stared at her for 3 long seconds, and then did the single worst thing he could have done. He laughed again, harder this time, shaking his head at what he assumed was a delusional woman's bluff. Whitfield Ground Holdings, he scoffed, unclipping the heavy radio from his belt like a man closing a case. Cute. You're not the first passenger to invent a company on a cell phone to get out of a seating dispute. Vanessa crossed her arms behind him, visibly relieved. Bradford Ashcombe raised his champagne flute in a private toast to nobody. 2 minutes later, the heavy thud of boots came down the jet bridge, and Officer Ray Delgado of the Atlanta Police Department stepped through the forward door with a pair of steel handcuffs already off his belt. Which passenger? Delgado asked, scanning the cabin. Captain Doyle pointed, seat 1A, refusing every crew directive, verbally combative. If she resists, cuff her. Officer Delgado had worked airport disturbances for 11 years, and he had learned to read a cabin the way a good nurse reads a patient. Screaming people, crying people, people throwing drinks. That was the usual profile of a disruptive passenger. The woman in 1A sat with her hands folded in her lap, like she was waiting for a bus. He stepped closer anyway, because a captain's words still carried weight, and reached for her arm. Ma'am, you need to come with me. Now. Officer Delgado, Danielle said, reading his badge, the way she'd read Vanessa's name tag. I would strongly advise you wait exactly 60 seconds before you touch me. You are being used to cover up a civil rights violation that started at gate B14 40 minutes ago. I'm not here to referee airline policy, Delgado said, but something in his voice had already softened half a step. The captain has final say on his aircraft. Outside the window, the enormous pushback tug clamped to the nose gear, let out a long mechanical groan, and died. Its warning lights blinked once and went dark. On the tarmac beyond, a baggage handler halfway through loading a cart simply stopped, pulled off his ear protection, and walked away from an open cargo hold. Across the terminal windows, gate after gate went still. Fuel hoses stopped pumping, jet bridges froze mid-extension, ground marshalling wands dropped to their sides. In under 30 seconds, the busiest hub on the eastern seaboard had gone completely, eerily silent. Then the cabin lights died too. The hum of the air vents cut out entirely. First class sank into the dim amber glow of emergency lighting, and for a long moment, nobody in that cabin breathed. That is the second frozen moment of this story, and it is the one none of them will ever forget. The only sound left was the heavy red emergency phone screaming from the galley wall, not the soft chime of a flight attendant call, but the harsh mechanical override signal from air traffic control itself. Captain Doyle lunged for it, his bravado gone in an instant. "Flight deck, Doyle. We just lost ground power, and the tug disconnected. What in God's name is happening out there?" The ground controller's voice on the other end was shaking. "Captain, you are ordered to hold position. Do not start your engines." Whitfield Ground Holdings just executed an emergency suspension of every contract they hold at this airport. Nothing belonging to Meridian Sky is moving. Not a truck, not a hose, not a gate. They've locked us down. The color drained out of Russell Doyle's face so fast that Officer Delgado actually stepped back to give him room to sit down. The captain's eyes crawled slowly across the cabin and landed on the woman in the faded field jacket, sitting perfectly still in seat 1A, and in that instant, 22 years of assumed authority collapsed into a single, sickening realization. "I told you, Captain," Danielle said, her voice cutting through the dark cabin like a blade through silk. "You should have read the name before you called for handcuffs." Officer Delgado lowered his cuffs without being told to. He had spent 11 years learning to spot real authority in a room, and he suddenly understood that the man wearing the gold stripes was not the one holding it. Vanessa Sharp, oblivious to the technical catastrophe unfolding on the tarmac, actually stepped forward with an exasperated huff. "Why is everyone just standing there? Arrest her. She clearly did something to the power. That's a federal offense." "Shut your mouth, Vanessa," Doyle snapped, his voice cracking, and for the first time all morning, she looked genuinely frightened. He turned back to Danielle, his shoulders sagging, all the bluster gone out of him, like air from a punctured tire. "Miss Whitfield, the system just flagged you as Sapphire. It didn't flag you as someone who mattered." "That is precisely the problem, Captain," Danielle said, and there was no warmth left in her voice at all. "You should not need a flashing light on a screen to treat a human being with basic dignity. You looked at my jacket, you looked at my skin, and in about 4 seconds you decided I was disposable. That decision is the only thing that happened on this aircraft today that was actually a federal matter." Across the aisle, Bradford Ashcombe had stopped smirking entirely. He was frantically refreshing a news app with hands that had started to shake, and when the page finally loaded, illuminating his face in the dim cabin light, his mouth fell open. "Whitfield," he said slowly, staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Whitfield Ground Holdings. You're Danielle Whitfield." "I am," she said, turning to look at him directly for the first time since boarding. "Miss Whitfield, I have to apologize. I was under enormous stress this morning. The merger. I'm Bradford Ashcombe, managing partner at Ashcombe Capital. We submitted a $340 million proposal to your board last week for the International Cargo Fleet contract. I'm sure we can put this small misunderstanding behind us over dinner in London." "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Ashcombe," Danielle said. "I read your prospectus on a flight out of London last Tuesday. Aggressive numbers. Very lucrative. There will be no dinner, and there will be no contract. When I evaluate a partner, I look at the character of the man leading the deal. You sit in a $9,000 seat, demanding the people you consider beneath you be removed from your sight. That is not a man I can trust with a global logistics network. Your proposal is permanently withdrawn." Bradford Ashcombe sank back into his seat as though he'd been struck. In under 6 minutes, his own mouth had cost his firm the single largest contract of the fiscal year, and the worst part, the part that would keep him awake for months afterward, was that he had done it entirely to himself. A sharp ringtone cut through the tension. Captain Doyle's personal phone. The caller ID read Gordon Whitlock, CEO, Meriden Esquire. He answered with a trembling hand, and the CEO's voice was audible to half the cabin before Doyle even got the phone to his ear. Explain to me right now why 40 aircraft are circling Atlanta with nowhere to land, Russell. Because I am told you tried to have Danielle Whitfield arrested on my own airplane. Sir, Vanessa told me she was hostile. I don't care if she was reciting the Gettysburg Address. Put Ms. Whitfield on this phone, or I will personally end your career before lunch. Doyle held the phone out. Danielle didn't take it. She simply tapped the speaker icon and let the CEO's panicked apology fill the cabin for everyone to hear. Ms. Whitfield, I am mortified. I am begging you. Lift the ground lock. We are losing millions by the minute. The FAA is already calling my office. It will cost you more than an apology, Gordon, Danielle said evenly. First, Captain Doyle and Vanessa Sharp are terminated, effective the moment they step off this aircraft, in front of the same officer they called to arrest me. Second, gate agent Trevor Banks demanded my physical ID after your own scanner cleared me, purely to harass me in front of a crowd. He's finished before I reach the jet bridge in London. Third, Meridian Sky funds an independent civil rights audit of every crew training program you run, and a $12 million scholarship fund for minority aviation cadets out of Atlanta. You have until the wheels touch down in London to confirm all three in writing. There was a pause on the line, the sound of a man doing the math between $12 million and a grounded international fleet. Consider it done, Gordon Whitlock said. You have my word. I'll be watching, Danielle said, and ended the call. She dialed Marcus one last time. Release the ground locks, Marcus. Let them fly. Within 30 seconds, the auxiliary power roared back to life. The cabin lights flickered on, and outside the window, the tug's diesel engine coughed and rumbled back to life. The airport was breathing again. Officer Delgado holstered his cuffs, looked at the captain and the flight attendant, standing frozen and stripped of everything in the aisle, and allowed himself the smallest smirk of his whole career. Well, he said, gesturing toward the open door, you two heard the lady. Yours trespassing on a commercial aircraft. They were walked off the same jet bridge they'd threatened to walk her down, past the very passengers they'd tried to impress an hour earlier. Danielle Whitfield opened her laptop, adjusted the collar of her jacket, and got back to work. She did not look at Bradford Ashcombe, who was staring out the window at a stock price he could already feel falling. What none of them ever learned was that a college professor 2 rows back, named Owen Yates, had been quietly recording audio the entire time on his phone, and that a dozen passengers waiting in the Zone 4 line at Gate B14 had already filmed Trevor Banks in full condescending color before any of them ever boarded. By the time Flight 447 touched down at Heathrow, 9 hours later, the world had already caught fire without her. The Zone 4 footage had leaked first, showing Trevor Banks smirking his way through the phrase, "Everyone belongs, sweetheart." Then Owen Yates's audio surfaced, capturing Bradford Ashcombe's Greyhound bus comment, word for word. The hashtag #GroundBedGrace was trending globally before Danielle had even cleared customs. The internet, as it tends to do, connected every piece with brutal efficiency. A black woman in a worn field jacket had been threatened with arrest for the crime of not looking rich, and had responded by shutting down the busiest airport in the country from her seat. Vanessa Sharp tried, 2 days later, to get ahead of it. She appeared on a national morning program with a journalist named Denise Halliway, wore a modest navy dress, produced 3 careful tears, and told America she had simply been trying to accommodate a distressed family. I was just doing my job, she said, and this billionaire hijacked an entire airplane and ended my career over a misunderstanding. Midway through the live segment, Whitfield Ground Holdings' legal team released the time-stamped gate manifest showing no separated couple had ever existed on that flight, along with security footage of Vanessa physically blocking the overhead bin before a single word had been exchanged. Denise Halliway read it live on air, Vanessa went pale, ripped off her microphone, and walked off set in front of 4 million viewers. She has not worked in aviation or hospitality since. Captain Russell Doyle's case went to the FAA. Ordering a Level 2 physical extraction of a calm, fully compliant passenger was ruled a gross abuse of federal authority, and his commercial license was suspended pending review. He now flies unpressurized freight routes for a small regional carrier in rural Montana, a long way from any first-class cabin. Trevor Banks was fired before his shift even ended. The clip of his smirk became, for a while, shorthand online for exactly the kind of small cruelty that costs people everything. He is currently working the overnight desk at a long-term parking garage outside the very airport that once employed him. Bradford Ashcomb's fall was the hardest of all, because it was entirely self-inflicted. The morning after the flight landed, the board of Ashcombe Capital convened an emergency session in Manhattan. Bradford tried to frame the loss of the Whitfield contract as a minor disagreement. The firm's senior partner, Walter Voss, simply played the recording. "Are we running a charity flight today? I pay $11,000. So I don't have to sit next to someone who looks like she wandered in off a Greyhound bus." The room went silent, then furious. "You cost this firm the largest contract in our history," Walter Voss said. "And you did it because you couldn't tolerate sitting next to a woman in a jacket you didn't recognize." Bradford Ashcombe was stripped of his title within the hour. His equity bought out for a fraction of its value, and he was walked out of the building he'd worked in for 18 years by the same security staff he had once ignored on his way to lunch. Months later, in a brief, unpublicized meeting, Danielle agreed to, only because his lawyer requested it in writing. Bradford sat across from her in a plain conference room, no suit this time, and said the only sentence that mattered. "I built my whole life on deciding who deserved my time before I ever spoke to them. I don't know how to undo that. I just wanted you to know I finally understand what I did." Danielle didn't offer him the contract back. She didn't need to. But she believed him and told him so, and that was the only apology in this entire story that she chose to accept. Meridian Sky kept every promise Gordon Whitlock made under pressure that morning. The $12 million scholarship fund launched within 6 weeks, sending its first class of 30 minority aviation cadets through flight school before the year was out. The independent civil rights audit rewrote the airline's training manual from the ground up, and within a year, 2 other major carriers had quietly adopted the same standard. 6 months later, Danielle Whitfield stood at gate B14 again, this time with her mother's ring resting outside her collar instead of hidden beneath it. A new captain, a soft-spoken veteran named Louis Hartman, walked the length of the jet bridge just to shake her hand before boarding and thank her, unprompted, for what her audit had already changed inside his own crew room. She didn't need the gesture. She appreciated it anyway. At the gate, a young black gate agent in a crisp new Meridian Sky uniform, one of the first hires brought on under the airline's new policy, recognized her immediately, not from the headlines, but from a training video the airline now showed to every new employee. "Miss Whitfield," the young woman said, "I just wanted to say thank you. I wouldn't have this job without what happened on that flight." Danielle smiled, the first fully unguarded smile of this entire story, and touched the ring at her collar the way she had at the very beginning. Except this time there was nothing to brace against. Then, "Let's make sure it was worth it," she said, and walked down the jet bridge without a single person questioning where she belonged. If this story moved something in you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, maybe even yourself, leave it a like so it finds the person who needs to hear it today. Share it with someone who has ever been looked at and judged before they ever said a word. And tell me in the comments, have you ever stood in that aisle on either side of it? I read every single one.